Our first video viewpoint comes from Dr. Danica Van Proosty, a professor in the Department of Geography and Environment Studies at St. Mary's University. She studies how factors like climate change are impacting Nova Scotia's 240 kilometers of dikes. The professor, her research team, and students work at different dike locations around the province. There isn't one band-aid solution for all of them. The scientist examines individual factors like location, land use, and the infrastructure protected by the dikes. Each dike is managed differently. Dr. Van Proosty creates solutions that work with nature and the environment, instead of against them.
A dike is an earthen structure which is used primarily to protect agricultural land. However, they also now protect infrastructure as well as towns and communities within primarily the Bay of Fundy. An aboiteau is one of the structures that is used within a dike itself. It is a one-way gate that allows for fresh water to discharge during rainfall events, but it actually closes. It's a flap that closes when the tide comes in, for the tide is high, and then prevents the salt water from going into the agricultural land that's behind.
There are 8 definitions in the video. Make notes for each one. Most of the definitions appear in this section. The first one, as mentioned by the university professor, is an aboiteau. It's spelled A-B-O-I-T-E-A-U. Aboiteau, a water control structure consisting of a tide gate at the end of a culvert that regulates water flow between a tidewater area and a drained upland area.
Depending on what land use is behind the dike and how active that is, will dictate the type of action that we may take with the actual dike itself. And in some cases that may mean topping up a dike if we're protecting really valuable infrastructure. In other areas it may be more strategic to move a dike back. Dikes are environmentally important for a variety of different reasons. One, they do provide this transition in terms of habitat diversity for the agricultural land that's behind it, as well as the upland areas that are behind it. And it provides some of the most fertile farmland within the province.
Our second definition is uplands, areas of higher elevation and drier soil that are adjacent to or surrounding agricultural marshlands or wetland regions.
Also the foreshore marsh, or the marsh that's found in front of the dikes. And both of these areas can be really important, particularly for pollinator species.
Our third definition is foreshore marsh. Foreshore is spelled F-O-R-E-S-H-O-R-E. A foreshore marsh is an area of vegetated marsh that exists within the zone between high and low tide.
Foreshore marshes are really important. They're partly the remnants of former marshland. In some cases, they also form after a dike has been constructed. The primary importance is they're the first line of defense for coastal communities to protect against storm surge and coastal erosion. As we're having more increasing with sea level rise, increasing risk of erosion, some of those areas of dike are now at risk. If dikes are breached within the province, depending on where that breach actually occurred, we do have significant potential for economic loss and also potential, permanent loss of infrastructure, agriculture, and livelihoods. As an example, if we were to have a breach of dikes up in the Chignecto Isthmus around the Tantramar area, we would be looking at and cutting off the Trans-Canada Highway. That's $50 million of trade a day and blocked off from the rest of Canada. So it really is important.
Our fourth definition is breaching. Refers to the process by which water flows over or through a dike, resulting in the partial or complete removal of the dike. This can occur when tidal waters exceed the height of the dike, causing the water to spill over its surface and inundate the surrounding area. Breaching can also occur when a section of the dike is intentionally or unintentionally removed, allowing water to flow through the opening and into the protected area.
We all work with the Department of Agriculture because ultimately they're integrally part of the decision making about where dikes, and they are actually the primary group that's responsible for where dikes are actually going to be realigned. For the Department of Agriculture, I've been consulting and working with them for really the last 2 decades in helping them develop best management practices to work with the natural environment rather than against it. It's been calculated about 80% of tidal wetlands have been lost in the province, primarily as a result of diking, but also as a result of construction of causeways and tidal barriers within the province.
Our fifth definition is tidal wetlands. Coastal ecosystems that are influenced by the ebb and flow of tides. They are characterized by the presence of wetland vegetation, such as salt-tolerant grasses, reeds, and shrubs, and are subject to regular tidal inundation. Tidal wetlands are found in areas where the land is near or below sea level and are typically located at the interface between land and sea. They may occur in estuaries, bays, and other shallow water bodies, and can take various forms, including salt marshes, mangrove swamps, and tidal flats.
It's important for the youth because these are future livelihoods, both in terms of the land behind that is being protected, but also making sure that the way that these lands are being protected are being done in a sustainable way and not at the expense of a lot of our ecosystems, which we have lost historically.
Our second viewpoint comes from Colin Weaver. Colin is the manager of capital projects with the Nova Scotia Department of Agriculture. Colin makes sure the dike upgrade project is running on time, on budget, and that each dike is managed individually and responsibly for all stakeholders. Stakeholders include any people who could potentially be impacted by changes to Nova Scotia's dikes. Those people and groups include business owners, homeowners, farmers, government, the Mi'kmaq, and many others. Colin regularly meets with all stakeholders.
The province does maintain our 81 agricultural marshlands and the associated 240 kilometres of dike and approximately 250 abattoirs, spread all the way across the province from down near Yarmouth up to the Amherst area and all the way along the Bay of Fundy. A Dykelands system upgrade project is a federal provincial cost share project funded 50% by the federal government under the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund and 50% under the provincial government. It's a $50 million project over 9 years ending in 2028. The Dykelands system in Nova Scotia protects agricultural marshes. When the Dykelands were originally built in the 1700s by the Acadians, they diked off existing salt marshes to create those agricultural marshes. Agricultural marshes, of course, are usable for producing all sorts of agricultural products, crops, grazing cattle, things like that. And our salt marshes on the seaward side of the dike provide a level of protection towards that dike, as well as providing habitat for fish and other aquatic creatures. The dikes were overhauled by the federal government in about the 1950s and 60s. It was the Maritime Marshland Rehabilitation Administration, the MMRA, and that was really the last time that there was significant capital work done to the dikes in Nova Scotia. We're now 60, 70 years past that date, and a number of our dikes are starting to reach the end of their usable lifespan. We know climate change is coming. We know it's started already. We know accompanying that is sea level rise, worsening storms, and as coastal infrastructure, our dikes and dikelands are going to bear the brunt of that impact. We know by 2050 sea level rise will be about a foot. By 2100 it will be about a meter, so 3 feet. And given that our existing dikes are at the end of their usable life, they're already too short. So with that coming sea level rise, those worsening storms, we know that we need to do these capital upgrades to the dikes to increase their elevation. Dikes in Nova Scotia protect approximately 17,400 hectares of land, and of that about 14,000 is farmable land. So approximately 10% of agricultural land in Nova Scotia is land protected by dikes. If that land were lost, of course, we'd see a significant impact to the ability of the province to generate food. As well, in the intervening years, since the 50s and 60s, there's been a number of other infrastructure projects permitted on some of those agricultural lands that's now protected by dikes that would be flooded if the dikes weren't there. So for example, in Wolfville, the wastewater treatment plant is actually on the agricultural marsh protected by the dike. If that dike was to breach, that would have significant impacts for the town of Wolfville.
Our sixth definition is Dykeland systems, refers to the interconnected components of a dikeland area that facilitates agricultural, economic, cultural, and biological activities. This includes the dike, abattoir, drainage network, foreshore marsh, intertidal zone, and agricultural marshland. These components work together to ensure the effective functioning of the Dykeland system. In the province of Nova Scotia, the provincial Dykeland system encompasses all dikes, abattoirs, and agricultural marshlands. There are also 81 individual Dykeland systems, each with their unique name, that include the components mentioned above, such as the Grand Pré Dykeland system, Understanding and managing the components of a dikeland system is crucial to ensure the sustainability of these areas and the communities that depend on them. Our seventh definition is agricultural marshland. Agricultural marshland refers to low-lying areas of land that are protected by a dike and predominantly used for agricultural purposes, although other uses may also be present. These areas are characterized by wet soil conditions, which may be influenced by their proximity to natural water sources such as rivers, streams, or wetlands. Our third viewpoint comes from Alexander D'Souza. Alex is the Director of Engineering with the town of Wolfville. He stays in contact with the provincial government and capital projects manager Colin Weaver. Alex's job is to make sure that any changes or upgrades to the two dike systems in Wolfville are in the best interests of all Wolfville area stakeholders. They include businesses, farmers, residents, senior citizens complexes, the municipal government, and many more interested parties.
The dike reconstruction project is being driven by the province of Nova Scotia. It's up to us at the municipal level to communicate with the project stakeholders as they develop the scope of the project, so we understand how the project impacts the town. The Bishop Beckwith dike system terminates to the west of the Wolfville Harbour, and the Grand Prairie dike system terminates to the east of the Wolfville Harbour. And what you have in between is this waterfront park area here and the rail trail that goes through this section. Cornwallis River, it joins with the Minas Basin, and the Minas Basin connects with the Bay of Fundy, which of course hosts the world's largest tides. So between Wolfville's downtown core and the Cornwallis River is the Wolfville Harbour here, the water level in which is influenced by the tides. Our role is to understand the risks associated with flooding, with climate change, and to implement a flood risk mitigation plan. We also have to understand what further actions must be taken by the town to increase community resilience to coastal flooding and extreme rainfall events. Climate change is causing the intensity and the frequency of some of these storm events to increase. So what may have been an irregular storm event 50 or 100 years ago is becoming more of a regular occurrence now. So in typical engineering practice, the size of storm sewer pipes, or the height of dikes in this case, is set based on the statistical likelihood of a particular storm event being exceeded. The existing shoreline of the Wolfville Harbour consists of a mix of natural marsh soils. There's natural and human-placed rock protection such as riprap or armor stone, and of course there's wood cribbing around some of the wharf structures as well. All of the existing shoreline protection measures that are in place now will have to be improved either by raising them up or replacing them with an alternative means to bridge the gap between the reconstructed dikes that the province is working on. The 375 meters in between the two ends of the dikes is basically like a gateway into the town and the surrounding area. So if you build two walls on either side of the town and leave the middle open, it's a doorway, but we can allow floodwaters in that way if we don't address it. Where the dike runs along the agricultural lands, if the water gets in parts of the dike that haven't been built up, then it's at risk as well.
Our fourth viewpoint comes from Dean Manning, a farmer in Falmouth, Nova Scotia, who's been farming with his family for 25 years. Dean says the land he owns that is protected behind the dikes contains the most productive and rich soils on his entire property. So protecting the dikes is extremely important for him, his family, and his farm, so they can keep growing and raising fresh, healthy food sources for Nova Scotians.
Where our farm is located here in Falmouth, we're in what's called the Avon Valley. With Lake Pisiquid is there and the dikes that generate from this. So it's the Falmouth Great Dyke Marsh, and we're just on the edge of the marsh. So the farm's located on really the edge of the marsh that transfers up into some upland and farming land, as well as the Dykeland. On our farm here, we crop about 300 acres of land, and a little over 100 acres of that would be the dike land that we use. Tides come in and the abattoirs weren't there and the dikes weren't there, it would be completely flooded. The dikeland soils here, we just kind of refer to them as kind of the cream of the crop of our farmland, because it's our best soils. They're deep soils. I know if you move into the uplands, we may only have 6, 8, or 10 inches of really, good soil, where if you get into the dikelands and you can ditch down in them and you can get into several feet, but I know it goes a lot further than that of good topsoil or good soil for growing crops. It's important that we maintain the abattoirs so that salt water doesn't come up the main drains or the drainage ditches, because there is that concern of saltwater intrusion in underneath the soil and the capillary action of the plants pulling it in. So you've got that depth, we'll call it, of the rooting zone of the plant. So if you can have that build up full of all these rich nutrients from the dikelands, and if you can eliminate the salt toxins that would be there from tidal actions in the past, then you've improved that for growing food for the community and society in general, and the diversity of crops that you can actually grow on those soils. Crops we grow here on our farm, and we have greenhouses that we do the farm market garden. So on the greenhouse side, we grow the tomatoes and cucumbers and the lettuce. We do bunching beet greens and spinach, mesclines, lots of bunching carrots and onions. With the beef cattle, we raise mostly commercial cows. We have some purebred Red Angus cattle here, and we produce all of our own feed for our cattle, and we grow corn silage for the cattle as well as our own forages. We also grow a bit of grain, whether it's rye or oats for feed for the cattle, and then the straw we use for bedding. So it's a pretty self-sufficient and sustainable operation as much as we can make it. We have about 80 beef cows that raise 80 beef calves a year, plus replacement heifers. And if we didn't have the dikelands that we're producing forage off of, we'd have to cut that down quite significantly, because we'll say that we might be able to run or have 20 to 30 cows. The value in maintaining and protecting the dikelands for farmers, and you have to step back and look at it. It's not really for the farmers, it's for society in general. It's extremely important we maintain them. It's extremely important that we upgrade them, because food should not be taken for granted.
Our fifth viewpoint comes from Andy Reardon, a landowner in Granville Ferry, Nova Scotia. Andy is the secretary of the Dentabalis Marsh Body. Marsh bodies are groups of people who help manage and protect Nova Scotia marshlands, which are agriculturally protected farmlands. Andy owns a small section of the 800 acres of marshland in the area. She allows a local marshland farmer to hay the land for free. In return, she asks that the farmer mow the hay, with the condition that he waits until after mid-August, when most fledgling songbirds have left their nest.
The Acadians built these dikes in the mid-1600s, and they are still here today, and farmers are still farming them, and the community is still reaping the benefits from these marshes. You have salt marsh, which is the area right next to the tidal river that's been built up over the centuries, and it's very valuable because it filters out pollutants, it stops flooding, and of course ecologically it's very important too. Then you have the dikes, and those dikes run all along the salt marshes, and then on the other side of the dikes you have the marshlands, which is the farmland, and then there's the upland. So you've got the upland, you've got the farmland, you've got the dikes, and you have the salt marsh, and then the sea. And that's the way it's been for centuries now. The marshlands are also beautiful grasslands, and they support a lot of ecology, from birds to mammals, reptiles, on and on. In 1880, the farmers in this area got together. There were several families, and they got together and they wanted to protect the marshes, and they developed what are called marsh bodies. It's our responsibility to protect the marshes and to make certain that they're used for agriculture, period. And there are people who say, no, take these dikes out, bring it back to salt marsh. I see their point. I certainly see their point, because salt marshes are very beneficial, and they've done a lot of salt marsh restoration in the Chevery area and in the Upper Bay of Fundy, and it's been quite extraordinary. But at the same time, we lose farmland. It's always these things that you really have to think about. What are the benefits, and what are the benefits for today? What are the benefits for 50 years from now? I personally think it will be salt marsh in 50 years. We may be at the end of an era.
Our sixth viewpoint comes from Claude de Grasse. Claude is the executive director of the landscape of Grand Pré Incorporated. Claude was a leader in the application for Grand Pré to be recognized as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, which is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. Grand Pré was awarded that prestigious designation in 2012. Claude is passionate about preserving the site and what it means for Acadians, Nova Scotians, and Canadians.
These Dykelands were created in front of the highest tides in the world by a very ingenious system by the Acadians. So the Acadians were deported in 1755, but the knowledge and their savoir-faire was passed on to the planters and to generations of farmers, so that the legacy of the Acadians creating these Dykelands is maintained. They were familiar with diking from Western France. So basically they started at Port-Royal to dike the lands around the Dauphin River, Annapolis River now. And once they had used all the lands there, the Acadians moved on. They looked for places in Nova Scotia that could produce very fertile Dykelands. And they moved to, the first place was to Beaubassin, at the border of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. They went to Truro, Cobequid, which was named, Windsor, Pisiquid, and they came to Grand Pré in 1682. The Dykelands are salt marsh, which have been turned into agricultural land. Once an area of Dykeland or salt marsh is diked, it takes about 3 years for the rainwater and the snow to get the salt out of the soil so that it becomes productive. So you cannot just take enclose an area and plant because it's too salty. So the rainwater basically desalinates the Dykelands and they become agricultural lands. The Dykelands are important for Nova Scotia, for Canada, and for the world in a way, because they've been recognized by UNESCO. For Nova Scotians, they're important because the Dykelands grow the crops that basically feed the cows who produce the milk, which supports the dairy industry. This place has maintained so much of its character, like in terms of rural, agricultural, and all that. The rural district of Grand Pré was named Canada's first historic rural district. So those two factors helped us to generate the ideas to go to UNESCO, essentially. It was the highlight of my career at Grand Pré. When I look at it, I look at 2012. Was very a watershed moment where not only the Acadians were celebrating, but the planters were there at the Visitor Center at Grand Pré. It was really a celebration of a lot of people who had put a lot of effort, between 2007, 2012, to get a UNESCO inscription. So this place is important for humanity as a whole.
Our seventh and final viewpoint comes from Mi'kmaq business leader Nadine Bernard. Nadine is from the Waikuba First Nation in Cape Breton, but now lives in Truro, Nova Scotia. She's the president and CEO of Indigivisor Advisory and Consulting. Nadine is a staunch advocate for the preservation of Indigenous treaty rights and culture. The Mi'kmaq are the first people of Nova Scotia. Their society flourished in the province for thousands of years without the use of or need for dikes. Nadine firmly believes any man-made objects that interfere with the natural course of water and the ecosystems around it are against the treaty rights of the Mi'kmaq. Our eighth and final definition today is treaty rights. These are rights recognized by the Federal Government of Canada for all First Nations peoples. Treaty rights include provisions for activities like hunting, fishing, and gathering. Treaties are agreements made between the federal government, Aboriginal peoples of Canada, and provinces and territories. They define ongoing obligations and underline the rights and benefits of each group involved. They were officially recognized and affirmed in Section 35 of Canada's Constitution Act 1982. Section 35 states the Aboriginal peoples of Canada includes the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada. Treaty rights are also a key part of the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
We are water and land protectors, so it's our job to make sure that the activities that are being done affecting the natural environment, which will then affect our treaty rights to be able to hunt, fish, and gather, is protected. It's not only that the Mi'kmaq have a deep respect, it's that we have a responsibility. Nadudalimk is a philosophy within Indigenous cultures. Plain English, I guess, would be sustainability, just the balance of what you take and what you give, and leaving behind enough so that it replenishes itself continuously for future generations. Nadudalimk, in those three references of respect, responsibility, and sustainability, is that we need to respect the environment. So if you're walking into an area and you see that it's already been harvested, like that, people have already picked the berries or picked the medicines, then you respect it enough to say that not today. Like it's not my turn to be going here.
Nadukulimk is an essential concept or way of life for Mi'kmaq people. It embodies a person's physical, emotional, cognitional, social, and spiritual relationship with everything, including the land, living beings, non-living beings, and things. The four core values of Nadukulimk include respect, responsibility, relationship, and reciprocity.
The dike system and the abattoir system is from Acadian descent, so it's not something that's from here originally. And so the consideration into the plant life and the fish life within wasn't considered. Those things are so important to Mi'kmaq people in regards to treaty. It's a very complicated and very emotional topic to be discussing, and the Mi'kmaq take a strong stance on that conversation. The Mi'kmaq have been very adamant and very vocal about protecting the environment, and any type of man-made structure changes the course of water and changes the natural species within the water that feed into our treaty rights. I firmly believe that any man-made structure that disrupts the natural environment is in direct opposition of our treaty rights as a Mi'kmaq beneficiary. You go back to the land acknowledgement, right? So in the typical land acknowledgement, it's, we recognize that, we are in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and traditional land of the Mi'kmaq. We don't see as one spot being our home. We see the whole territory as being our home. And we were fluid in where we went to hunt and fish and gather and stay. We don't see it as us owning the land, but as protectors of this land.